I'm Will Fuller. I'm the chair of the Southwest Neighborhood Schools Committee. Southwest Neighborhoods Inc. usually called Sweeney, so it's the Sweeney Schools Committee. And the project was called Sharing Our Family Stories. It came about funded by a neighborhood small grant from the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, but that wasn't the real impetus for it. The project actually started with a racist incident up near one of the schools, where back in the campaign in 2008, someone had defaced an Obama sign with racial slurs, and one resident, who was an African American, was deeply offended by this. And she couldn't find any sympathy from other parents or the school for how deeply hurt she felt. And that sense of isolation in a community of well-meaning people who are liberal in their views, are not racists, was sort of got our schools committee thinking, what do our schools teach about people's cultural backgrounds? And we took a look around and found this project. An 8th grade student studies some ancestor or relative or something about history, and they do a 3-part project. It's a big project. They do a paper, a research paper, they do an oral presentation, and they do a trifold display about that ancestor, talking about their background and where these kids came from. Now this, when you see all the displays, there'll be hundreds of them in each school, side by side, you have a little United Nations of people's backgrounds right here in Southwest Portland. No preaching, no cultural event type of colorful costumes thing. These are the kids, actual, who they are, real kids in the school. And there's, for example, one person's ancestor they talked about was a survivor of the Holocaust in concentration camps, went on to help found the State of Israel. Just a few displays down was a person whose ancestor was a Nazi officer in the same war. There are people from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from all over the world who are the background of these kids. And without doing a lot of preaching and a lot of funny stuff, they learn about heritage. So that was a way of saying, hey, how can we share that with the community to get people a little more aware of our backgrounds and the needs to respect differences.
Tell us a little about how, or if that this project helped encourage new membership or new community leaders for Sweeney?
Okay. Well, it got people aware of Sweeney, one thing. It wasn't directly tied to building membership. The schools committee is a neighborhood organization-based group. We get members from the neighborhood associations, the representative of Bridle Knoll or Hillsdale or Multnomah or so on. We're not a mass organization. Southwest Neighborhoods serves all the neighborhoods in the Southwest, 17 of them. We got people involved in their community, recognizing first what the kids did, which is important, and second, what they could do as neighbors when they share their stories. And there were some pretty emotional sharing times during the discussions. In fact, that's one reason we went for a grant, because there was concern about hitting sensitivities that needed professional mediation. So we hired professional mediators from Resolutions Northwest to lead the table discussions and coordinate the overall event. And that's what the grant paid for. It was over half of our expenses was paying the fees for the mediators. And but as far as organizationally, we didn't get a lot of membership. What we did get was community awareness and a strong sense that people wanted to continue it and went out with their neighbors in a, I hope, a more inclusive way.
And talking about continuing this project, do you see this this project with the students continuing at Jackson and Gray?
It is continuing at Gray. Jackson, I had heard they may be thinking of cutting it, or at least cutting back on it, because it's a lot of work, and they were having trouble. And this is a sensitive area. This is a sensitive area. I mean, we're dealing with racial and cultural issues all the time. You've seen the things around immigration, the whole idea of Obama presidency. There's a lot of that in the area. It's sensitive. They found that some kids felt left out. They didn't have a colorful ancestor or someone they felt proud of, or their parents really weren't able to build the kind of fancy health the fancy displays that they felt really kind of put down. So it was the opposite of what they were trying to build, was a sense of inclusion. I think what they're doing, and I need to check that out, schools committee needs to check it out, I think they're reworking the program to be more inclusive. So what it comes down to is, how do people learn about each other and their differences in a way that makes their lives different? And when they approach someone else as different, they're more willing to listen, like when this woman was upset about a racist incident, a schoolmate is having trouble being bullied, they're facing all sorts of traumas you get when you're a middle school and a high school student of, I'm different, I'm weird, nobody likes me. The recognition that there are other people who are different and weird and also interesting is a pretty important message. So I hope the program continues.
Were there any unexpected ways that the project kind of shifted and changed during the process?
A couple of ways, actually. This involves getting permission from parents, talking to kids, talking to teachers and principals and so on. I tended to go through the principal to the school, and I think in retrospect there was not as much communication with the teachers ahead of time that we could have had. So that starting up, we would be more directly involved with the teachers so they understand exactly what's going on. We shifted the tone of the project. It was always going to be a dialogue around tables with adults and kids. We probably should have prepped the adults a little better to understand what they're doing, and given a more structure in the very beginning. There was some question about where do we go and where do we sit, that sort of thing. One specific, it got noisy. There were too many tables in the room and people got a hard time hearing. And we shifted that along. If we would do it again, and we might, the funding got cut in half, so I don't know if we can afford to do it again. But similar things you can do in churches, get funding in other areas to continue. We'd be stronger in prep up front. And the basics of it we worked out. But it actually went pretty close to what we'd planned.
Did you make an effort to involve other members of the community, folks who didn't have kids in the school?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the majority of the community members didn't have kids in school. That's there's a statistic, 83% of the adults in Multnomah County don't have kids in school. And we were really focusing on those 83% because they make up the predominant members of neighborhood associations. We were going two things. People don't have kids in school, and people aren't necessarily actively involved in the community. Senior citizens are an obvious group, but this was an age range. They were young couples, single people, people who were middle-aged. One guy just kind of wandered in off the street, kind of thing, and as well as seniors and parents and so on and so forth. Everybody participated, including the facilitators. They got involved in the discussions, so it was a real sharing. And the Sweeney staff, who was kind of nervous, so they got to cause some kind of a problem, came away really feeling that people in the whole community had been heard.
I just wondered if there's anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to share or you think is really important for us to know?
Well, one of the things is understanding the depth of importance of these little projects. This particular one had a controversial issue involved, but when people are directly involved in their community, the funding helps them be directly involved. You get a lot of benefits. There's a sociological study, a guy named Robert Putnam, who wrote a book called Bowling Alone about the decline of what he calls social capital in the United States. Two things. One, he wrote another book called Better Together, where Portland was actually a star of social capital. The other was the link between people being involved in community activities, like this, or like neighborhood associations and other things. In his case, he was studying Italian cities. And some cities worked well, some cities didn't work so well. What were the differences? He came down to basically two things, was choral societies and football clubs, soccer clubs. When people got together in a community to do community well activities, they talked about the mayor or the roads or whatever's going on, and because they were connected, the city functioned better. Very direct political effect. And so encouraging activities like this, the small grant funded activities where people get together on projects, builds, I think, a better city and is well worth the money. I'm sorry they're cutting the funding.